Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Design a Vendor Risk Management Architecture. My name is Doug Yarbenitz. I am Director of Marketing at Lynx Technology Partners. Lynx is the sponsor of today's presentation. As most of you know, today's webinar is part 3 of our 3-part series on vendor risk management. We hope you were able to join us for the full webinar series. If not, you may download the slides from part 1 or 2 and this presentation, and we will also provide a link to the recordings in a follow-up email after today's event. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You should see your attendee interface on your computer desktop in the upper right corner. When you join today's webinar, you selected to join either by phone call or computer audio. If for any reason you would like to change your selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane in your control panel. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation or via email after the event. The How to Design a Vendor Risk Management Architecture is available for download in the handout pane of your control panel. You may download anytime during the presentation. As I mentioned, today's event is part 3 of a 3-part series on vendor risk management. Details will be included at the end of the presentation and in your follow-up email on how you can download and listen to the recordings of part 1 and part 2, just in case you missed them. Before I turn things over to our presenter, I would just like to say that Lynx Technology Partners has been honored and excited to sponsor this series. In case you weren't with us last week or on part 1, just a quick introduction to Lynx. We are one of Inc. magazine's fastest growing private companies and ranked among the top U.S. security companies for consecutive years. Lynx Technology Partners is an information security and risk management advisor that customers in highly regulated industries worldwide depend on to improve security posture, facilitate compliance, reduce risk, and refine operational efficiency. Lynx security experts help customers recognize and control IT-related risk and maintain compliance with major industry and government standards. Through consulting, security and risk assessments, penetration testing, managed security services, and an award-winning GRC solution, we support many critical projects for security-conscious leaders. With that said, I would now like to introduce Michael Rasmussen, the GRC pundit at GRC 2020 Research. Michael?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today and really talking about what is the most important topics for a lot of organizations out there, and that's how to manage the risk across third-party relationships, particularly vendor relationships. You know, organizations are encumbered by a variety of different types of relationships, and it's important that we be able to properly manage the risk as well as the compliance and controls in those relationships. If you think about it, in going back a couple decades, you know, the term insider was pretty much a synonym for an employee. Now, half of our insiders are not employees. They are vendors and contractors and outsourcers and service providers and temporary workers and brokers and dealers and agents and intermediaries and suppliers and you name it. You know, our organizations are porous with the interconnected web of third-party relationships. Leonardo da Vinci stated, realize that everything connects to everything else. And that's the state of business today, is an interconnected web of relationships. And each of these relationships causes exposure, particularly things like information security exposure in today's webinar topic and context, upon the organization. And the organization needs to more effectively manage risk across these different relationships that they're encountering within their business and operations. This has become a significant challenge for many organizations. But let's define what I mean by third-party management or third-party vendor risk management. Third-party, and right now I'm going to adapt the GRC definition, the definition for governance, risk management, and compliance found in the OSEG GRC capability model, and change, you know, by adding words in blue here to it, because I think it appropriately defines what we're talking about in third-party vendor management. Third-party vendor management is a capability that enables the organization to reliably achieve objectives while addressing uncertainty and act with integrity in and across its third-party vendor relationships. The reliable achievement of objectives is the governance function of those relationships. We have vendor relationships for specific purposes. Are those purposes being achieved? Is there value in the relationship? But in context of that, we not only want to get value, we want to make sure that risk is properly mitigated to acceptable levels. We need to address uncertainty in those relationships and understand the risk and risk exposure. And we need to act with integrity to laws and regulations, but integrity to our own, code of conduct and corporate social responsibility practices. That's the GRC aspect of third-party vendor management. That third-party vendor management is a capability that enables an organization to reliably achieve objectives while addressing uncertainty and act with integrity in and across its third-party vendor relationships. When I look at organizations, I often find that they manage these third-party vendor relationships in a lot of documents, spreadsheets, and emails. Now, this is part of a three-part series, and these first couple slides I've done in a couple of the other ones. So we're building upon each other here and connecting these three-part series together. But this is the heart of what we're talking about today, is how do we approach information and technology architecture that is sustainable, that is efficient and effective and agile upon the organization. Right now, many organizations that I interact with have what I call the inevitability of failure. There's too many approaches. There's too many documents, spreadsheets, and emails to try to manage third-party relationships. I just got off the phone this morning with an organization, trying to manage, hundreds of vendor relationships and documents, spreadsheets, and emails, and things are slipping through the cracks. Things that were submitted are only halfway submitted, and they got to send them back. They don't hear back. They got to follow things through. There's really no automation or notifications and tasks and reminders, and it's a mess. It's like Hercules battling the Hydra. Hercules had many battles to fight. One was this multi-headed dragon called the Hydra, and you chopped off one of the Hydra's head, the dragon's heads, and multiple heads would grow up in its place, causing more issues. And that's what it's like to manage vendor risks and document spreadsheets and emails. It's a losing battle. It's going to work against you because the economies of the number of relationships and things that you have to manage and stay on top of are growing, and it's just too much to manage in documents, spreadsheets, and emails. So when I look at organizations and their overall strategy, the first week of these webinars, we looked at vendor risk management strategy. Then the next week, which is last week, we looked at the vendor risk management process, and today we're looking at the vendor risk management information technology architecture. When it comes to strategy, there's two approaches. We have the distributed vendor third-party management approach, in which the different departments do different things in different ways and don't collaborate and work together. Or we have a federated vendor risk management approach, in which there's common information and technology architecture that can be shared across the business to more effectively manage these third-party vendor relationships. So my challenge for you in all three of these webinars is, if we wipe the slate clean and can restart how we're approaching vendor risk management, what would it look like? If you think about it as an analogy, third-party vendor management also reminds me of the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose, California. This is a sprawling mansion that was built in the 1800s, and it took 38 years to build. It cost $5.5 million in the 1800s to build. That's one expensive house today. It had 147 different builders, but it had no design, no architect, no blueprint. That's very much the same thing upon your organization. The Winchester Mystery House has doors that open to walls. It has skylights that are in floors instead of ceilings. It's got stairways that go up or down to nowhere. Just because all these builders just sort of did their own thing. Now, organizations have approached vendor risk management very much that same way, without thinking strategically, saying, how should this be designed? How should this be architected? They just start throwing documents, spreadsheets, and emails and build manual processes and things, and before you know it, you've got a mess, just like the Winchester Mystery House. So if you could step back and wipe the slate clean, what would vendor risk management look like within your organization? So what I've been recommending in this series is a top-down approach, that you first define your vendor risk management strategy and get those different people involved into the strategy and understand what you're trying to approach. And it's just not information security involved in vendor risk management. You have procurement, you got legal, you got corporate compliance and ethics, and other departments as well. So get those different people involved in the strategy, build some type of third-party management committee and charter, and move forward with that strategy. From there, you can build your vendor risk management processes. And we'll look at those in just a second here as a recap from last week. And once you understand your processes, you can then build out your proper vendor risk management information technology architecture, which is the heart of what we're talking about today. So we need to build out that vendor risk management plan and strategy. In this context, we need to understand what our goals are. What are we trying to achieve? and how are we working together? What's the audience? What type of vendors are out there? Different vendors have different risk exposure. There's a different risk exposure between your IT outsourcer and somebody that's watering your plants in your environment. Now, both bring their different types of risks, but the most significant risks in that context are going to be your IT outsourcer. They have access to your data centers and confidential and often regulated information. So what's your different types of audience and the different types of categories of third-party relationships? What resources do you need to put in place to effectively monitor risk in these relationships? How can you make things accessible? Is there a portal that you can use to communicate to third-party vendors? And what types of languages do you need to support if you're dealing with an international audience? What are some of the metrics and measurement that we want to look at in managing our third-party vendor risk management program? How do we align with other groups and define internal stakeholders and owners of relationships and get executive support and buy-in? And that's all part of our third-party management plan. When we look at the overall vendor risk management process that we talked about last week, it started with registration. That at some point we need to identify that, that there's a vendor out there to engage. Once we register and get basic information on the vendor, we then qualify the vendor and we ask them more detailed information, ask them submit, information security attestations and reports and audits. That we might have them, acknowledge the code of conduct and things like that. And so you qualify that the third party is the right company to do business with for the type of work that you're engaging them. And then you move into the contracting phase. And then once the contracts are complete, you onboard them. And from there, you probably communicate more of the vendor code of conduct and other things out to them. And you move into some type of regular maintenance and renewal cycle. From there, you can manage risk and compliance in the ongoing relationship throughout it and performance. And you provide audits and inspections and exercise your right to audit clauses. And you manage issues and resolve them. And then at some point, you offboard or retire the third-party vendor relationship. That's the overall vendor risk management process and life cycle that organizations need to follow and manage effectively within their organization. But today, we're going to talk about the information technology architecture to support that. Ultimately, we want to be able to provide the right people, the right access to the right information at the right time. And this is often what's critically an issue with trying to manage vendor risk and document spreadsheets and emails. Because I've seen organizations literally with thousands of document spreadsheets and emails to manage vendor risk, particularly when they have thousands of suppliers and vendors. Communications and assessments and attestations are going out to each one. And you try to build a report. And in some areas, like financial services with the OCC requirements, there's a responsibility upon the board of directors to oversee vendor risk management. And so you have to build reports and the status and overall risk exposure and consolidate all this information. And that takes a massive amount of man hours, or FTEs, full-time equivalent, to be able to consolidate and report upon. And things certainly are not efficient, they're not effective, and they're certainly not agile in that context. We need a good information architecture that can bring this together. Good technology for vendor risk management should enable reporting. Instead of taking, 48 hours to 80 hours to consolidate hundreds of document spreadsheets and emails to build a quarterly third-party vendor risk management report, all that information, if it was in the right information architecture, can easily be mined and reported on within a matter of seconds, if not minutes. Good, efficient management reporting, reducing things significantly from, tens to hundreds of hours. Being able to manage the audit trail and system of record of who did what, when, how, and why, and have auditable records of what was communicated to vendors, what did they acknowledge and attest to, and be able to defend the organization, because bad things do happen. And to be able to defend yourself and avoid compliance liability as well as litigation liability, we need a good, strong system of record and audit trail that can stand up in court. My friends, documents, spreadsheets, and emails, again, don't get you there. Anybody can fabricate evidence with documents, spreadsheets, and emails. There's no specific timestamps. You don't have any type of specific, authorization and authentication capabilities that says that we know that person logged in on that date and time and attested to that vendor code of conduct. and answered those assessment questions and submitted that information, you don't have that in document spreadsheets and emails. They can be completely fabricated and fictitious. You need a strong system of record that has a good audit trail to be able to defend itself in court. The other thing is workflow and tasks. Again, this morning when I was talking to a company looking for solutions in this space, this is one of the key things that came up. Things are getting missed. You know, there's nothing out there that really automates the task management and deadlines, and when deadlines are approaching for a vendor to submit something, to remind them, or something's missed to escalate things. You need good workflow and tasks. You need strong collaboration capabilities to be able to collaborate with different departments so that information security can work with procurement, which can work with corporate compliance and ethics and legal and other departments. We need to be able to understand where things are breaking down and be able to go out and address those exceptions and issues that are being found. We need to be able to integrate with other systems, such as, you know, the ERP environment and things that contain a lot of procurement information and master data records. Have good visibility and global reach and availability across the organization, so that in the information architecture, we can have strong accountability, good automation, workflow, and tasks, have a single repository for vendor risk information that is consistent and easy to report upon. So when you look at vendor risk management contextual intelligence, there's a lot of different things that we need to bring in together. We need to understand our contracts and the controls and service levels and things that are put in those contracts, monitoring transactions in the relationships, doing proper due diligence, background checks, and information security validation and things during the onboarding and ongoing thereafter, monitoring, you know, negative news and geopolitical events and things, providing regular assessments such as annual assessments and surveys and questionnaires that third-party vendors have to fill out, gathering attestations to security as well as code of conduct and other policies, understanding capabilities, delivering training, provide disclosures when there's exceptions and things that need to be documented, monitoring overall performance and quality of the relationships, you know, monitoring the audits and inspections and service level agreements. And we need to be able to take in all these different distributed and disconnected third-party data points and bring them into an information architecture that can integrate, map them, analyze them, and build action items of what's most critical they need to respond to. You know, a vendor risk management information architecture is going to help us establish the objectives of the relationships. What is this relationship there for? And what type of access are we giving this vendor relationship? From there, we can understand the risks. What's the risks in this relationship? Is there business continuity risks? Is there information security and privacy risks? Is there environmental health and safety risks? You know, what are the different types of risks? Which of those risks can hinder the objectives and purpose of that relationship? What are the controls that are put in place to mitigate those risks to acceptable levels? You know, issues and incidents, that's materialization of risk. How often have we had issues and incidents in a particular relationship? The number of issues and incidents indicate that we need to reevaluate that relationship. How do those issues and incidents help us with our risk models and analyzing risk in those relationships? Who owns the relationship? Who is the risk owner and the business owner? What are the roles on the other side of the relationship that you communicate to? What are the type of policies that need to be communicated in those relationships? You know, do we have a vendor code of conduct? Do we have other policies like information security and privacy policies and facilitated payment policies or whatever it might be that we need to communicate and gather attestations that those policies will be followed in each of those third-party relationships? You know, what are the regulatory obligations? You know, we've got regulations like the OCC requirements upon banks and financial services organizations. You've got anti-bribery and corruption laws like US FCPA, UK Bribery Act. You've got things like conflict minerals or UK Modern Slavery Act, California's Transparency in Supply Chains Act, PCI DSS requirements and third-party vendor relationships in IT. You know, you have lots of obligations. How do we ensure that the right controls and risks are being mitigated and policies being followed in each of those relationships to meet our regulatory obligations? And then where does this vendor, interact with the organization? What part of the organization? And who's responsible for the relationship? If we have a solid information architecture for vendor risk management, it should mean that we have higher quality information, that we understand contextually what's going on in the organization, how to interact with different parts of the organization and bring them together. We can optimize our processes and make them more efficient and effective. We can then better allocate our capital where our risk exposure is the greatest to mitigate those risks down to acceptable levels, which then can also improve effectiveness of vendor risk management overall, while we try to protect the brand and reputation of the organization and make things more efficient by reducing costs. Now, when you look at technology for third-party vendor risk management, I categorize this as one segment of the enterprise GRC space. So there's GRC solutions out there on the market. Not everyone does everything. There are solutions that focus specifically on third-party management. There are solutions that have third-party management as part, of a broader solution set for enterprise GRC or IT GRC. But I break out the GRC market into 17 categories, and all those categories are before you here. But third-party management is its own category there at the bottom, with the capability to govern, manage, and monitor the array of third-party relationships in the enterprise, particularly risk and compliance challenges these relationships bring. But if you look across that, there's third-party management aspects to enterprise GRC, to business continuity management, to compliance management, to environmental health and safety management, to IT GRC and security management, the policy management and communicating, supply chain, vendor code of conduct, and other policies, quality management. Third-party management is very pervasive across all these categories, even though it's its own category by itself. So third-party management technology requires that architecture requires that there's some type of integrated technology. Organizations need to understand that they need to consolidate information in a unified technology system to effectively manage, document, and report on each third-party relationship and the risk and compliance aspects of it. So when I look at the third-party management technology market, you've got third-party management platforms out there that provide, an end-to-end solution for managing third-party risk and compliance. You've got very focused solutions that were built for, maybe managing just like PCI DSS third-party management, but they're not looking at, OCC requirements on banks and other stuff. Solutions that were very much more narrowly focused. You got procurement and ERP third-party solutions, screening and due diligence solutions, and other tools. And so like our host today, Lynx, would offer, much more of the third-party management platform to provide an end-to-end experience in managing vendor risk, particularly from an information security context. Then you got a lot of intelligence and content that can plug into these third-party systems. Different forms and templates, watch lists, sanction lists, looking for negative news, information, IT security ratings is down there at the bottom. There's different types of content that can fit into these solutions as well. So what I'm telling you right now is that in today's complex economy, your vendors and suppliers, contractors, agents, and other third parties, they play critical roles in your business. It's too complex to manage without some type of integrated strategy that includes people, process, and technology. And so the very first webinar, we focus on the people, building out that strategy and getting different groups together. The second webinar in this series we focused on the process, and then this one's talking about technology. But the overall goal is to protect and grow value by establishing a capability to see your entire third-party landscape with real-time information about external and internal events that may change risk profiles and impact performance. But at the heart of this, and I've already said this once, what's critical in building a vendor risk management solution is a strong system of record. That you can show what was communicated to a vendor on what day, what attestations and information did you receive back. They have some level of certainty that that vendor and a specific individual within a vendor, signed and acknowledged and submitted that information. You need a strong system of record and audit trail that documents, spreadsheets, and emails just cannot provide you. You need to be able to understand the version, date, and time of different types of assessments or code of conduct and things that were sent out. Be able to document an ability for vendors as well as the organization to ask and resolve questions to each other and document those questions and the answers. Provide a way and a functionality and a system of record that shows that that vendor relationship met the specific requirements in the contract, particularly regulatory requirements. That any exceptions in the relationship were documented and managed and monitored regularly. That we understood the context and sequence of events of things that happened, and we have auditable records and a repeatable cycle for doing regular routine assessments, and be able to manage this whole process end-to-end and on a continuous basis. Some critical elements of a vendor risk information technology architecture. First is, the vendor empowerment. you need to be able to collaborate and provide full visibility into third-party relationships while balancing third-party confidentiality. You need technology that can help you communicate to third parties and provide that system of record and automation of the overall process. You need a user experience that is intuitive. Now, the number one buying criteria for GRC technologies right now is ease of use and intuitiveness. People are very tired of dated, old applications that look like they were written 10 years ago or more. And they also want something that's easy to engage at the front lines of the business or the third parties. These aren't necessarily IT security experts and people out there that have to like sign and acknowledge attestations and things. They don't want complex systems. They want intuitive, easy to use systems. And because it's not just like information security managing vendor risk, it's the line of business that owns that relationship. It's the on the other side, the vendor relationship themselves. And you need to be able to integrate and manage a wide range of information and provide a delivery model where internally you can access the vendor information and risk and manage risk, but you know that your vendors themselves that don't have network connectivity can you also access it. The technology needs to support and be easily configured and support the entire life cycle for vendor risk management. So let's look at some critical capabilities. First off, let's define this technology area a little more clearly. Vendor risk management solutions provide capabilities to govern, manage, and monitor the array of third-party vendor relationships in the enterprise, particularly risk and compliance challenges. So overall, solutions for third-party vendor risk management should allow you to manage the process from onboarding, approval, due diligence, communications, assessment, evaluation, issue management, and offboarding with robust workflow, task management, and content management capabilities. You know, these solutions should have a third-party portal for third parties to be able to submit and share information, take assessments, provide attestations, and other related requests and forms to complete tasks. And finally, they should provide evidence of a system of record and audit trail of all interactions, assessments, audits, inspections, interactions with third parties that you can use for external auditors, for regulators, or if you're in court for some type of litigation to defend the organization. Some critical capabilities of vendor risk management solutions is the ability to manage that process, to register vendors and suppliers and have them submit necessary documentation, to provide due diligence on an ongoing basis as well as during the initial onboarding to make sure that vendor is the right person to do business with, to provide structured risk assessment and analysis and measurement of risk across third-party relationships, to be able to communicate policies to those third-party relationships, such as vendor code of conduct, information security policies, privacy policies, where needed to provide appropriately training and measurement of awareness of those policies to third parties, to provide compliance assessment and analysis to ensure that regulatory compliance requirements and legal requirements are being met, to be able to manage issues in the relationship, to document those and evaluate and investigate them, and then resolve them. Provide proper forms and disclosure management for third parties to be able to fill out and submit information, and have a portal in place where audit can come in when you exercise right to audit clauses to find their audit findings and things on the third-party relationship, as well as be able to manage the overall offboarding process. Now, when I look at solutions in the market, I often break them up into basic, common, and advanced solutions. Basic third-party management platforms, focus a lot on the workflow, forms, and tasks of third-party management. And the value is really trying to move away from the manual approaches of document spreadsheets and emails and replace it with a solution that can manage workflow and tasks around that type of content. and that's how I define a overall basic solution. It can help you manage the back-end process of third-party management, and it has workflow and tasks in place, and has some level of compliance, risk assessment, reporting. It probably has some basic due diligence in context of workflow and tasks. There's notification and escalations. You can track attestations and report on issues. Has some type of survey capabilities to deliver surveys and assessments, and an audit trail. But on its limitations, the basic solutions usually don't integrate well with the broader ERP environment and other systems, and don't have more advanced capabilities. Common third-party management platforms are the ones I come across much more frequently in RFPs. And I've got an RFP database of hundreds of requirements for third-party management that I work with organizations in helping them design and develop their RFPs in this space and evaluate the vendors in the market, like our host today. But common third-party management platforms have the range of features commonly found in enterprise third-party management RFPs that span the organization's needs. They build upon the foundation of workflow tasks and assessments and forms with features to provide greater integration with other systems and have better content integration. Some core capabilities of more of the common competitive third-party vendor risk management solutions is that it has all the capabilities of the basic solutions, particularly around workflow tasks, assessments, and content. But it has the ability to manage the entire process from onboarding to offboarding and be able to document that life cycle. It has some level of integration with ERP and other business systems to collect and monitor third-party information like master data records and transactions. It might have some basic contract management capabilities to store contracts and identify key SLAs and performance indicators and risk indicators to monitor in each relationship. It has some type of basic portal capability to collect and communicate information with the third parties, and has some way to manage audits and inspections and document that as well. Now, I also look at advanced capabilities. Advanced capabilities are common solutions that have more advanced features in them. And not everybody does everything here. Nobody does everything. But one advanced feature is that third-party portal, where there's a strong, intuitive, engaging, user-friendly portal for third parties to interact with. Another capability is a self-registration process. This is like a wizard-type interface that, if I have to submit information during that onboarding process, all I have to do is type in the vendor email address, and they get a link, they click on it, and all of a sudden, boom, they get like a TurboTax wizard-type interface that requires them to answer all this information and submit documentation. They can't go on to the next task until the last task was finished, and it completely changes the dynamics of the FTEs needed to manage a lot of these relationships. Without self-registration and all the back and forth in emails and halfway filled out assessments and questions, it can take 4 or 5 hours, maybe even 10 hours to set up a vendor, depending on the scope of it and the number of things and documentation being submitted. When self-registration is involved, I've got less than 5 minutes. All I have to do is enter an email address, and then the third party gets all that information, and they have to go through the wizard interface, and they can't go on to the next section until they finish the first section and properly submit everything. Master data records and third-party information management is the ability to provide great integration with the ERP environment and synchronize information, providing ongoing and continuous due diligence and monitoring, like IT security rating services out there and things like that, and to alert you when things have changed. More full life cycle contract management, be able to manage third-party networks so that one vendor can be assessed once and is good for a variety of relationships, and doing spend analysis on third parties and overall third-party planning. But when you manage these different types of relationships, it's important to have an RFP process and be able to understand what you're going through and what your needs are. And you gather those from all the different stakeholders that are involved in the process, and you get those different capabilities, and you build out your RFP requirements. Now, at GRC 2020, I often get engaged in this area because I've got RFP templates for third-party management with over 250 different requirements for third-party management solutions. But then you go out and you select the different solutions and evaluate those requirements against them. And building out a business case for third-party management, there's 3 angles of GRC value that third-party management solutions can deliver to your organization. One is efficiency, financial capital savings and human capital savings, time saved, dollars saved. Before, it took me, 3 hours on average to onboard a vendor and get all this information. Now it takes me 15 minutes because things are automated and there's less things slipping through cracks and less follow-up. That type of thing. It's the efficiency message. The effectiveness. We've got greater insight and visibility in reporting on our third parties. We understand where risk and controls and issues are, and we're resolving and mitigating those and containing those. And then the agility, being responsive to change, to changing regulations, to changing business environments, and keeping up with the business change within your environment, the regulatory change impacting you, but also the change within your third-party environment, because you might have contracted them 2 or 3 years ago, but that doesn't mean they're the same vendor today. Their employees are changing. Their business is changing. Their IT security practices that you might have felt confident in 3 years ago might not be the same practices anymore. There might be things slipping through the cracks. You need to be agile and make this a continuous process. So when you're evaluating vendors out there, you want to make sure that you're engaging a vendor that has the long-term potential to meet your needs, that they're not just in here for the short term and short haul, that they got some type of track record and capability to sustain the interaction with you. that they have the right content and themes that you're looking for the types of risks that you're dealing with, like information security risks and vendors, that they have the right mobility options to support you, that they're easy to use and configure and intuitive, that they have the right reporting and reports and metrics you need, and overall analytics, that they've got strong client references that can speak to what for past experience of working with this vendor and the product, and specific domain and industry expertise for your industry as well. Some particular keys to success: you need to have an information architecture that can know who, where, and what, that we have some way to categorize and document all of our third-party vendor relationships, that in this information technology architecture we can continually evaluate risk and value and measure that, and that we have proper triggers for notifications to internal and external parties so things don't slip through the cracks. The flip side, the common mistakes, is trying to manage all this manually in document spreadsheets and emails is just a recipe for disaster. Not standardizing on your policies like vendor code of conduct and information security and privacy policies for vendors is a critical mistake. And then failing to work with and communicate with internal parties that own those relationships is also a mistake. As you mature your vendor risk management program, through this cycle of building out your strategy, defining your processes, and implementing the information technology architecture support that we've talked about in this three-part series, you can become more aware of your organization, its relationships, and how they interact and impact objectives. This allows you to become more aligned with other groups like procurement and legal and compliance and ethics and internal audit and others, so that you can work together and have a good visibility into the vendor relationships and the risk and compliance aspects of those relationships. This enables us then to be more responsive, so we can identify where issues are and mitigate those before they become big issues. It also allows us to become agile. And as our business changes and we take on new relationships and we reevaluate old relationships and things, and there's new regulatory requirements, we can be agile and nimble in an environment that requires us to be nimble and fast. And therefore, we become more resilient when issues do come up, and lean, basically efficient in our use of resources. So 2 things to note: I do offer complimentary inquiry for organizations that are looking at the variety of different types of solutions out there in the market, as well as RFP support and development as well. And with that, I'd like to turn this back over to our host, as there's the recordings from the previous 2 webinars, but we'll move to the conclusion of our webinar today.
Well, thank you, Michael. We'll take a couple questions submitted and cover those offline in follow-up emails. I'd just like to once again thank Michael Rasmussen and thank everyone for attending today's webinar, How to Design a Vendor Risk Management Architecture. We hope you found this topic valuable, the whole series for that matter, and then we look forward to seeing you on future webinars. If you do have additional questions, in addition to anything submitted, please feel free to contact me directly. My email's in your webinar invite, as well as the follow-up email you receive. And you can also visit linksgrc.com. Once again, once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view the recording of today's webinar. On behalf of Links Technology Partners and our presenter, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.